Thanet. And my interest in sleep came about very much because when children were being brought to lift, it was very, very apparent that lots of the children with special needs and lots of the children with SEMH needs were coming, and sleep inevitably became part of what we were talking about. It became a central problem and difficulty that I was seeing that was really common. So that was most of my reason for learning about sleep. So I became a sleep counsellor. So today I'm going to share with you what sleep is and the science behind sleep. Inevitably, as part of that sharing, you'll get some strategies alongside that. And what I really want to do is raise the profile and importance of sleep for children's development. That's really, really key to what I want to do. I want you to leave being curious about sleep and wanting to find out more about it and wanting to share more information with your parents. So what actually is sleep? It's a natural but reversible state of awareness. That's really important that our children know that. It's essential state of rest. We will all fall asleep within a 24-hour period, even if it's what's called a micro sleep, which is just a brief seconds long. We will all fall asleep. We won't be able to help ourselves. The key bit also is that it's a reversible state of awareness. That's important because some of our children, and especially our children with anxiety, some of them can think that it's the same as being unconscious, and it isn't the same as being unconscious. And that can be quite anxiety driven for those children. One of the phrases, I didn't realise and didn't think of the phrase until I delivered sleep to my first lot of parents. And one of them gave a gasp when I talked about the definition of sleep. And I said, "Oh, tell me more." And she said, "Oh, my dad's just passed away," she said, "and since then my child hasn't slept as well." She said, "But I used the phrase, granddad died in his sleep," which is a phrase lots of us use a lot of the time. And actually she went back and unpicked that with her son, and that was part of the anxiety around it. If granddad can die in his sleep, then maybe we can all die in our sleep. So it's just being aware of what that language is. Another key thing is that actually we're not at rest. Our brain isn't always at rest when we're sleeping. Our brain is very, very busy, and in some cases our brain's busier when we are asleep than when we're actually awake. So it's not just a period of nothing's happening to us. And for our children to know that we can always be awoken from sleep. Your senses will wake you up, the big one's sound, but you can be woken up by smell as well. There's a little quote up there from Matt Walker. So Matthew Walker is one of the sleep gurus, that sleep is your life support system. And he would argue that sleep is the crux of everything, and that's where all of the everything, education, healthy eating, healthy exercise, being healthy, is built upon sleep as your basis. So how much sleep should we be getting? Again, this slide can make people gasp a little bit as well. So if you look there, from a new baby, 14 to 18 hours sleep, that's including naps. Moving up to a nursery age child is 10 to 12 hours. If you look beyond that, primary age, school age, teen, adult, it doesn't actually massively change much. And you look at the sleep needs of a teenager, and the higher end of that is kind of 10 hours. That's the same as your lower end of your sleep of your nursery age child. Our children still need a lot of sleep, and we have this almost misconception of when our children are getting older that they no longer need the same amount of sleep. Teenagers I'll talk about a bit later on. They have a physiological reason why they want to go to bed later, but they still need the 8 to 10 hours worth of sleep. While I'm talking about sleep needs, a lot of parents sometimes say to me things like, "Oh, my child doesn't need that amount of sleep, they only need 2 hours and they're fine." I would argue that they're not fine, and we'll look at overtiredness. I know there is a link between autism and sleep as well. Lots of the children that I see in my case list and parents have talked to are children and parents with autism. And the statistics are that between 50 and 80% of children with autism experience some sleep problems, which we will touch on later on, and it might and is related to melatonin as well. But it's really important that parents realise the amount of sleep that their child does need. This is the majority of people. There will be a couple of people that will sit just under that and sit just over that, but this is what your child does need to sleep. Over tiredness. So this is when this slide's here because I get parents saying to me things like, no, they're fine. They go 2 hours sleep and off they go. Actually, what happens is their child gets overtired. They might get, sometimes call it a second wind. Sometimes I've heard it being known as the child's wired because they're overtired. And it is an actual thing. Our body releases the hormone cortisol amongst other hormones to keep you going. And chronically doing that isn't a good idea. Yes, it'll get you through the day, but that's not a good way of being. Interestingly, being overtired is usually the culprit behind why people wake up early, why children early rise. It's actually because they're overtired, which sounds really counterintuitive. Also, the reason why children wake so much in the night is usually related to being overtired as well. That's also to do with the way that they settle, which we'll talk about in a minute. So you might see that the child is overly excited and overly the second wind with overtiredness. Another sign of overtiredness is that the child falls asleep within a couple of minutes of going to bed. So the statistics show that if you're falling asleep before 4 to 5 minutes of going to bed, that's what's called crash out sleep. And that's when their body has literally, it's got nothing else it can do. It falls asleep. It's not the child choosing and learning to self-settle. They've fallen asleep because they've crashed out. And if you get crash out sleep, your body doesn't go into the same sleep cycles as you would want for optimum sleep. So again, it's not necessarily a good thing if people are saying they're falling asleep within a couple of minutes of going to bed, because of the type of sleep they'll get as well. So we're going to have a look at some of the science and the benefits of sleep and why we sleep. All of these things are really useful to share with your children in an age-appropriate way as well. So one of the main things of why you sleep is your immunity is boosted. We know from several studies that that is one of the biggest ways to boost your immunity. Healthy eating is important, but the sleep scientists would argue that actually sleep is the biggest way to boost your immunity. Chronic conditions such as heart disease and obesity are reduced. There is a link between heart disease and lack of sleep. There's also a link between obesity and heart lack of sleep as well. There's also, they've started saying that recently, shift work is one of the biggest carcinogens, one of the things to be checked for and looked out for as well. So the massive impact now is knowing we learn more and more about sleep all the time. One of the reasons that obesity is linked with sleep is that when we have enough sleep, when we're not sleep deprived, we release a hormone called leptin. Leptin is a hormone that tells you when you're full up and maintains and regulates your appetite. So it'll say stop eating, you've had enough, or you're hungry now. When you're sleep deprived, you also release a hormone called ghrelin. And what ghrelin does is it basically overrides your leptin, and it tells your body that you need to grab something fast, like carbohydrates, starchy foods, sugary foods. And you feel more hungry because your leptin has switched off your appetite suppressor, and you grab the wrong types of food. So again, that's one of the reasons there's a link with obesity. The other one is when we sleep, we regulate our blood sugar levels as well and our glucose levels. Growth hormone is released when we sleep. Kids find this fantastic and amazing that actually you do grow in your sleep. That is when you release growth hormone if you're a child. And it isn't released when you're awake, it is when you're sleeping. Cognitive functions are developed and maintained. Our memory, our preparation of our brain for learning, all of these things happen when we're sleeping. Our memories are changed from our short-term memory into our longer-term memory. They're consolidated. Equally important is that we forget things that we don't need to know anymore when we're sleeping. So, for example, if I go to Tesco's and I park my car and then I come out to get my car, I don't want to remember all the other 100 spaces I've parked in. I want my brain to have forgotten that. I want my brain just to remember the space that's relevant for me to then at the time. Otherwise, I'd be very confused. So memory is really key as well for forgetting memories as well as making new ones. One of the other things in terms of memory and mood for sleep is we store our positive memories and our negative memories in different parts of the brain. Our positive memories, the part of the brain positive memories are stored in, is impacted by lack of sleep. So we will remember less of them if we are sleep deprived. However, our negative memories are stored in a different part of the brain, which isn't impacted the same way by lack of sleep. So therefore, we keep storing our negative memories, but we don't store as many positive memories, which makes it life very pessimistic and glass half empty. So that's again a link with mood, depression, and sleep, and they're a vicious circle as well, because if you're depressed, you're less likely to sleep, but if you're less likely to sleep, you're also more likely to get depressed. Self-healing occurs, our body fixes itself. I've talked about blood sugar levels. Our impulse control is improved. Our being rational, our choices, and what do we rely on all day for our children at school? They have to be able to control their impulses. They have to be able to choose to pay attention to the right things. Their central executive skills are vital when it comes to learning in school. So we know that it's massively impacted by lack of sleep. Talked about the memory consolidation. At one point, 10 years ago, we thought that our memory consolidation, sleep was important to consolidate memories. But what we also know now is that sleep's important for our brain to be in a place to receive those memories and that learning as well. So it's equally important that we have sleep before learning and also we have sleep after learning. We know that toxins from the brain are removed with the lymphatic system, so there are actual processes that remove these toxins from the brain that build up over time. And our mood is stabilised. We are more able to deal with stress and anxieties. Again, if you think about that for our children, those children are really, really struggling to deal with those things. And then on top of that, you've got lack of sleep. It can be really difficult to get through the school day without fallouts and misunderstandings. Our muscle mass actually builds when we sleep, not when you're at the gym. So yes, you go and do the work at the gym, but the muscle mass builds when we're actually sleeping. That can be your buy-in for your teenagers as well. While we're talking about muscle mass, a really interesting thing that I read recently is that when you don't get enough sleep and weight loss, if you don't get enough sleep, 60% of your weight loss comes from muscle and not fat. So again, even where we lose weight is dependent on how much sleep we get. Our motor skills and coordination are improved. That's your buy-in for your gamers as well, and your sporty children that are wanting to do better at their gymnastics, wanting to do better at their gaming. Massive difference, loads of studies that have shown the massive difference between their motor skills and coordination when they're tired and when they're not tired. I've added a little bit on here. I don't know much about dreaming, but the benefits in dreaming, which happen when we're doing our REM sleep, our rapid eye movement sleep mostly, include creativity and the ability to bring those memories together. So the pulling in of the jigsaw puzzle and fitting everything together, as well as processing traumatic experiences as well. What I'm going to share next is a hypnograph, or sometimes it's called a hypnogram of sleep. And I think it's really, really key when you're thinking about some of the strategies as well and why those strategies exist. So what you can see here is a sleep graph for an average, a good sleeper, a 9-year-old girl who's getting kind of 10, 11 hours sleep. And what you can see is that we go through sleep cycles. So you can see at the very top, you've got this kind of light sleep here, and we go into deep sleep. And then with the red part is our REM sleep. Now, all of our parts of sleep are really, really important. They all do different types of jobs. If I was to wake you up, the difference between light and dark sleep, deep sleep in terms of your knowledge is, if I was to wake you up and you were in light sleep, you would be able to, I would say to you, have I woken you up? And you would go, no, I'm fine. But if I was to wake you up and have a phone call and you were in deep sleep, and I said, oh, have I woken you up? And you went, no, I'm fine. I'd go, oh no, I did wake you, because I would be able to tell. Because if you're woken from deep sleep, you are much groggier, you're more confused and more irritable than you are if you're woken from light sleep. And our Apple Watches and phone, I think you can set like smart alarms where it allows you to be woken up in between, and the best time in between 6:30 and 7:30. They're trying to work out if you're in a light sleep or not as to when to wake you up. It's also why when parents are woken up in the night, they will deal with their children differently depending on whether they were in a light sleep or a deep sleep. If you're in a light sleep, you're more likely to be more tolerant and go back and resettle the child. If you're in a deep sleep, that's the time that parents are more likely to get into bed with their child or let their child into their bed and not allow them to self-settle. And it's the same with when we wake our children up in the morning. Sometimes we'll get an okay response and it'll be fine. And that's probably because we've woken up in a light sleep. And sometimes you'll get a really, really grumpy child not wanting to go up and yes, and not being very pleasant. That could be that they're in a deep sleep cycle and they've not been woken up at a good time. In terms of this, these little peaks here that are marked by an arrow, these are what's called micro awakenings. So remember that I said this was for a good sleeper. Everyone, good sleepers included, everyone wakes 2, 3, 4 times in the night. The reason that we don't know this as such is because good sleepers will roll back over and go back to sleep. There'll be minimum impact on you, be those micro awakenings. We all do it. We roll over, we might puff up a pillow, you might kick your leg out the covers, and you go back to sleep and you don't remember it most of the time. What a bad sleeper would do, or not a good sleeper might do, is they might wake up, and when they wake up here, they wake up fully and they wake up with a big start, and that can look like their child's crying, screaming, running into a parent's bedroom, shouting for a parent to come and sleep with them. And bearing in mind, we all have these micro awakenings. The micro awakenings stay as small awakenings, provided the conditions we went to sleep in are the same as what they are when you wake there. So, for example, if you are a good sleeper and you fall asleep in your bed, and I was to then pick you up and put you in another room, when you had that micro awakening, you will wake up fully because you're not in the position that you were in when you fell asleep. For our children, if they have had something or someone that's helped to settle them to sleep, and by settle them to sleep, I mean that the conditions that they fell asleep in, where that a parent was next to them when they fell asleep, or a light was on when they fell asleep, or their telly or their tablet was on when they fell asleep. When they come to this micro awakening here, instead of kind of subconsciously waking up and rolling back over and go to sleep, they will wake up fully because something has changed and it's a bit of an alarm system. So that even goes for things like if the hallway light was on when they fell asleep, and then they have their micro awakening and the hallway light is no longer on, that can cause them to wake up. So one of the strategies I talk about a lot with the parents is whatever you're doing to settle them at that time needs to be then mimicked those times through the night. So if that is leaving a light on, instead of having a bright hallway light, you can buy red or orange bulbs from Amazon, for example. Could they have a dimmer or a red or orange light? It's shown to be better than white lights. Could they have that on all night? If they have a white noise machine to get to sleep, the ideal would be that the white noise machine stays on. If they have someone who helps them self-settle, i.e. someone is rubbing their back or someone is lying next to them, they are going to continue to fully wake up in these times and need that to get back to sleep. So that's why teaching children to self-settle, and you can do that in really gentle methods, can be really, really key to them sleeping through the night, because once you've got this initial settling right at the beginning of the night, your awakenings become micro awakenings because they're settled and secure. If you're not feeling safe and secure for whatever reason, whether that's stress, whether that's related to the environment changing, whatever, these micro awakenings become big awakenings, and that's when your child then wakes up and stays awake and can't get back to sleep. It's not because the child only needs 4 hours sleep, as a parent might sometimes say to us. Another key thing about these, the hypnograph, is that as you can see, as the time goes on, these blocks of REM sleep get larger. So REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep, is when most of our memory and learning takes place. So you can see as the night goes on, you get these bigger blocks of REM sleep. So if you were to cut this child's sleep short, so if we were going to say instead of this child getting 10, 11 hours sleep, if we were to then say this child all of a sudden only gets 7 hours sleep, and you cut off this whole chunk here, you've cut off two massive chunks of REM sleep, the big long REM sleep. You can't get that back. Yes, the next night they could sleep for longer and they'll be less tired and more refreshed, but you can't get the learning sleep back. Happens at the end of our sleep. That's the best type of sleep for our learning. So it's about quantity, it's about quality of sleep, not just quantity and the type of sleep that you're getting as well. Another key thing, a reason why I can't just share, if you go online, you can find sleep hygiene strategies, you can find strategies for sleep. They're all over the place. And as general, most people know what these are. None of them really come as a surprise. What people don't know is the science behind them, which is what I hope to link the two together. But you can't just apply a one size fits all with sleep. Every situation is unique. Every family is unique. You can apply the science and you can apply the sleep hygiene, absolutely. But when it's looking at the individual situations, you have to think about tweaking situations. You have to think about, okay, so what's the best we can get to with this family? What's the best we can make this situation? You've got things like even little things like football clubs that go on till later at night. These all impact what the routine is for the bedtime. So it's just that I wanted to put this slide in to make everyone aware that it's not a one size fits all approach. Everyone's different and it's the same when it comes to sleep as well. Melatonin and cortisol. So melatonin is your body's natural hormone that is produced in as a result of basically losing light. When it becomes dark, our body, our circadian rhythm, our body clock starts to produce melatonin. And melatonin is a naturally produced hormone in our body, and it's not a sleeping. It is a sleeping thing. It gets our body ready for sleep. It's like the ready, steady. It's like the go of sleep. So it prepares your body for sleep. It gets you ready for sleep, and it's really, really key. And the main way that we trigger melatonin is by it being dark. Causing melatonin is cortisol, and cortisol is a really useful hormone as well. It's what keeps us going. It's released in response to stress. It wakes us up in the morning as well. But it is produced in response to stress. So if the two come head to head, melatonin and cortisol will always switch off melatonin. So what we have thought and what might be the case is that children with autism, for example, and ADHD can't produce melatonin in the same way that neurotypical children can. The science is kind of saying, I'm not sure that it's I can't produce melatonin, actually. They produce the melatonin, but the cortisol switches it off. I have heard lots of parents say to me, no, I can't, my child has autism, therefore they can't produce melatonin. Melatonin is produced in your pineal gland, and unless you are blind or have had, and when I say blind, you can't see the difference between light and dark at all, or you've had your pineal gland removed or it's damaged, in general, people can produce melatonin. It may look like the child isn't producing melatonin due to the behaviours and due to the cortisol switching it off. A study in 2010 found that children with autism had a significant higher level of cortisol and just generally day to day in their body than children without autism. One of the studies, not that same study, but one of the studies shows it's about 30%. Another study with people with ADHD found that they released higher levels of cortisol in response to stress than the general population do. So it could be that the cortisol is switching off the melatonin. Obviously, you can get pharmaceutical produced melatonin. And what what the trainers that I've trained with would say is that melatonin on its own might help shift some things, and it might help get your child ready to bed for bed. But to sustain that and to get the best use of it, it should always go alongside some sleep training. It should always go alongside a sleep routine, because without that, it doesn't tend to maintain. The ideal is that you would have it for a short period of time, sort out your body clock, sort the circadian rhythm, and then over time you would come off that melatonin, or it would be reviewed, certainly. So yes, parents can get quite touchy when it comes to melatonin, quite rightly. And I think educating parents on the fact that their child probably is, most definitely is capable of producing melatonin. So in terms of strategies for anxiety, or strategies for children with autism, or anything alongside stress and sleep, they become very, very, very personalised, because it's about lowering that cortisol level, lowering that stress in their body to allow their melatonin to take over and allow them to go to sleep. Mindfulness is fantastic for doing that. There's things like box breathing, there's colouring, there's loads of things that you can do, but it's highly individualised, because it's about the child feeling relaxed and finding ways to burn off the cortisol. One of the main ways that we burn cortisol is through exercise. So again, finding a sport or even going to the park on the way home from school can be really, really beneficial to our children's sleep. You hear in particular women as well, but you hear particularly men saying, oh my goodness, I feel really out of sorts because I haven't done my run this week, I haven't done my run today. That's to do with burning off the cortisol as well. So what do we need to sleep? Sounds silly, but we need sleep pressure. That is builds up over the course of the day. We need to feel tired. And it reminds me of one of my cases. I worked with a family who had a 13-year-old girl who used to go to school, and she had autism, and she masked massively at school, and it was exhausting for her. So when she came home, she used to need to sleep, and parent was like, but look at her, you can see she needs to sleep. And absolutely she did. But what she did was she came in from school and she fell asleep from 4 o'clock till 6 o'clock every night, and they couldn't keep her awake. But inevitably what that meant was that her body wasn't, the sleep pressure hadn't built up over the course of the time, so her body wasn't ready to sleep until about 2 o'clock in the morning. And then she had to get up for school the next day, so she was getting up at 7, and the vicious circle continued. What we did is we acknowledged the fact that she was feeling really tired. We got all of that, but we broke the routine in terms of her coming back home. We put in a little middle ground. So for a period of a week, she went to a friend's house for an hour where it wasn't socially acceptable for her to fall asleep. And she didn't fall asleep because she wasn't in the environment, and basically moved her bedtime forward when she then came back and sorted it all out that way. But it was hard, but it was doable. Even though she was absolutely exhausted, we could do something about it. We also ideally need our body clock, our circadian rhythm in sync with our lifestyle, in sync with our going to bed, and what's called zeitgebers, which are time givers. We need all of these things to work together. So the biggest zeitgeber or time giver is light. So the reason why our body starts to produce melatonin is response to the daylight disappearing. Equally, the most important thing if you're wanting to set a bedtime routine is that getting up in the morning and going out in natural daylight as quickly as you can, because we're telling our body that it's time to get up, and all these things are really important. Other zeitgebers, time givers, are social interactions and social cues. When you do certain things, the times you eat meals. So when we have our meal, acts as our body clock and tells us what's going to come up next. So if you've got a family, for example, that their child's going to bed at 11 o'clock at night, and they eat their meal every night at 8 o'clock at night, if you can get that family to move that meal from 8 o'clock gradually over to 6 o'clock, our body will get used to that and think, oh, actually, I know that 2 hours after this, I start to go to sleep. All those things are what's called time givers, and the zeitgebers, and tell us what our body clock should expect. Even environmental cues, things such as hearing the sounds of birds in the morning, can be a time giver in terms of our body clock and when it releases the hormones that it releases. This is also linked to what I was just saying about body clocks. For our body to fall asleep, we need a few things to happen. So we need the melatonin to come in, we need cortisol to dip, but we also need our body temperature to drop, and our heart rate to drop. And both of these things have to happen for us to fall asleep. So your heart rate is also linked to your cortisol levels and making sure we're calm and relaxed before bedtime. Body temperature naturally drops off as we fall asleep. This is why one of the strategies that you read it for sleep hygiene are have a nice hot bath. There is a science behind a nice hot bath. A nice hot bath is artificially raising your body temperature so that when you come out of that bath, your body temperature drops rapidly and mimics what happens before you fall asleep. Now, that's a great strategy for most people. If you've got a child who's massively anxious about having a bath or gets in the bath and gets massively excited by having a bath, they're going to raise their cortisol levels, and that's not going to be the right strategy necessarily for them. I have read recently that people that don't have a bath, putting your feet in a tub of hot water does a similar thing. It was only one study I read on it, but I thought it was really interesting because it artificially raises your temperature and then brings it back down. You can do things like the heated throws in the bed. If you're going to do that, I do that before the child then gets into bed. So the bed's nice and warm for them getting in, and then you switch it off so their body temperature comes back down. Our circadian rhythm controls lots of things as well in terms of when things happen. So the best time to run a race, for example, is between 3 o'clock and 8 o'clock, 3 p.m. and 8 p.m. But that's the worst time to sit a test because your cognitive functions are lower at that time. Best time to sit a test would be between 9 and 12. And if you look at people's body clocks and circadian rhythms, there's actual set times that things happen. Growth hormone is released at a certain time between 12 a.m. and 4 a.m. So it's really fascinating, and it can be really fascinating for our children to understand that actually at specific times, pretty much, your body's doing all these really, really important things regarding sleep. I've brought us back to the hypnogram just briefly in case I forgot to say about the importance of self-settling. So this is generally what's going wrong for a lot of our children. It's that they don't know how to self-settle at bedtime. They don't know how to fall asleep. And they need to have someone with them or a sleep crutch. Now, for some of our children, that can be they need to have their phone in their hand to fall asleep. We'll talk about technology in a minute, or it can be that they need to have be rocked to sleep. I had a child who was 13 who was still being essentially, she had her back rubbed really, really vigorously, and she was effectively being rocked to sleep. And what happened was the minute mum left her side, the minute mum couldn't get up and go to the toilet, the minute she did that, she screamed and it really, really stressed and really, really upset. Because the conditions that she'd fallen asleep in weren't still being met. So the importance of teaching children gently to self-settle, and we're not going to go into that strategy, but the strategy for that is called the disappearing chair or the graduated withdrawal, where the parent slowly withdraws from the room and withdraws from being next to the child in terms of settling them down, is really, really key to the child sleeping through the night. Anything that you do to self-settle them at the start of the night needs to be there at the those times of micro awakenings. So I have told families, keep the light on. Can we make that light a orange light? Can we make it a night light? What can we do with that light to make it less bright? Because obviously light switches off our melatonin as well. But there are times where you think, okay, we need to keep that going. If it's not a problem, it's not a problem. So I have had people saying, well, my child falls asleep listening to music and they don't wake up later on. Absolutely fine. If they don't have a problem with sleep, they don't have a problem with sleep. But those children that do have a problem with sleep, you want to keep those conditions the same as much as you can to prevent that very, very disruptive waking up through the night. Popped a slide in here on teenage sleep. So biologically, physiologically, there is a reason why teenagers find it more difficult to go to sleep at a reasonable time. Their circadian rhythm shifts by about 2 hours, but they still need the 8 to 10 hours sleep per night. So our society in some parts of the country have trialed things like sixth formers starting at 10 o'clock instead of starting at 9 o'clock. Other countries start much later. If that was our system and the teenagers could go to work at 10 o'clock and go to school at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, that would be fine and there wouldn't be a problem. Our system's not built to do that. So there is a physiological reason why children, as they become teenagers, want to stay awake, but there's also other reasons as well. There's social reasons as well. It's the time that the house is quiet, and it might be the time that they feel they've got a bit more ownership in the house. So can we recreate that time another time for them? It's the time they might feel they're not going to be disturbed, the time that they want to game, all their friends online. There's lots of things, but the kind of crux of it is they still need that time to sleep. And how can we teach them? How can we, the ideal situation is that they've been taught sleep hygiene from when they're young and they understand the importance of sleep. I have known families to switch off Wi-Fi at certain times of the day and all that kind of stuff that you can do. But what you want your child, right from when they're young, to know the importance of sleep all the way through to when they're a teenager, to take with them into the adult life. Yes, there are things like schoolwork that come into play. There's work that they go out and do. There's lots and lots of things that happen for our teenagers that genuinely make it harder. But equally, there is this social media as well, which is holding them on there, which can prevent sleep as well. So it's just about educating teenagers as well and getting them to buy in. One of the things that I think is really important when we talk about teenagers is I didn't realise when I was in Starbucks the other day, the amount of teenagers that were in getting a coffee. Sleep and hygiene, this is sleep and caffeine, sorry, are massively related. So the half-life of coffee, meaning the time that it takes to come out of your body, is kind of up to 5 hours. So if you have a cup of coffee with your dinner, or a cup of tea, it contains caffeine as well, at 6 o'clock at night, it could be, you could have half of that caffeine still in your body at 11 o'clock at night. It would be like going to Starbucks and getting half an espresso and then expecting to fall asleep. So the half-life of coffee and the impact of caffeine, it delays sleep onset, it reduces your sleep duration, it can decrease your sleep quality, and it can also have increased wakenings through the night. So the latest research says that the ideal would be that you don't have any caffeine after about 2 o'clock. But again, if you've not got a problem with sleep, you've not got a problem with sleep. For those teenagers, adults that have children, caffeine is also in chocolate, it's in fizzy drinks, and it's in your energy drinks as well. So just having a think about that and making sure we're educated on caffeine and sleep. I'm going to touch on sleep and technology, and I think Virginia is going to come back to this a little bit as well. So 6 months ago, I would have absolutely said an hour before bedtime, make sure there's no technology in the room. So technology, phones, electronic devices all emit something called blue light. Blue light mimics sunlight. And scientists say that the closer the screen is to your face, i.e. tablet and phone, the worse the blue light impact is compared to a television, for example. But when you dig more and more into the more recent evidence on blue light, scientists are actually thinking and saying that it might not actually be the blue light itself and the technology that's the problem. It might more be what the child is actually doing, or the adult or the teenager is doing on that device, that causes more of a problem. So, for example, if the child is playing Fortnite, or they're gaming in terms of a competitive thing that they're getting hyped up about, they're either getting excited or getting stressed, those things are going to heighten their cortisol levels, and they are going to stop them sleeping. Absolutely, that's going to have an impact on their sleep. If, however, someone's using an iPad and they're looking at, I'm thinking the first thing that jumped into my head is In the Night Garden, the cartoon that I used to watch with my children when they were younger, or watching something really calming, or the sensory type things, it isn't going to be as bad. And in fact, it might be calming to that individual. So I am wary certainly devices have blue light that mimic daylight, that inhibit melatonin, and studies have shown that ideally you wouldn't have a device an hour before bedtime. It comes with a but for me now, because as it's actually what you're doing on the device. So even if you are social media, TikTok, Facebook, even if you see something on there that you like and you hit the like button, that's still hitting areas of your brain where it's going, I want more of that. I want to see more of that. Equally, if you see something on Facebook and you think, oh my goodness, they've been on holiday like 10 times. Oh my goodness, how frustrating. I wish that was me. That is, again, cortisol levels. If you're doing something on a device that's calming, though, then it could be seen as slightly different, is what I want to say. But it's a tricky one. I definitely don't want parents to, when I do training, leave and think, oh, it's fantastic, my child can be on their device while they fall asleep for 5 hours at night time. That's not what I'm saying, but what I'm saying is about what they're doing on the device, not the device itself, that needs to be looked at. I have put in here a slide, the final slide, about sleep hygiene. And I want to link these as much as I can to the why now. So people read these things and we know these things, but without knowing the reason behind them, it's easy to not carry them out. So that get out in natural light for at least 30 minutes as early as possible. That's about your body clock. So if when you wake your child up in the morning, it's not light now, is it? Depending on what time you get up. But if you can open the curtains or even get them to go outside as soon as you can to do a job for you. I sometimes get mine to go out to the car and get their school bag in. Anything that can get them out in the natural light, because it's saying to our body, oh, it's time to be awake. That also links with if you are trying to change a sleep routine and trying to get your child to go to sleep at the same time for school, for example, and wake up for the same time, you should keep that routine going at the weekend. You should wake your child up at that same time at the weekend if you're trying to change a sleep habit or sleep routine, because otherwise you get, we'll lie until 10 o'clock on a Sunday, but then because you're laying until 10 o'clock on a Sunday, it means you're not going to bed until 3 hours later on the Sunday night, and that takes days and days to fix. Whereas if you keep it the same while you're doing sleep training or trying to change a sleep pattern, then it's much more effective. We've talked about caffeine-based drinks and why behind that. Finding ways to deal with stress and anxiety. That's the key reason why a lot of our children aren't sleeping. They need to have ways to get rid of that stress and anxiety. For some children, that might be journaling before bedtime. If I said that to my eldest son, he would be like, that's the worst thing you could ask me to do. That's really stressful. For some children, we often do the children's reading books at bedtime. For some children, that's lovely and they like reading to you at bedtime. For other children that find reading really stressful, bedtime reading isn't going to be the time for them to do their reading book. So it's about knowing your child and knowing what stressors you want to avoid. Anything stressful in that last hour before bedtime. Avoid having a nap during the day. Actually, napping itself isn't too bad as long as it's done for shorter periods and it's during earlier times. You don't want to have late naps because it prevents a sleep pressure building up and then you don't get to sleep. The long lie-ins at the weekend we've talked about in terms of it breaks that routine that you're trying to create. Clearing homework out of the way last hour before bed. Again, it's releasing cortisol. We don't want to release cortisol. However, if you've got a child who really likes doing the homework and likes doing all the handwriting, there's nothing wrong with them doing the handwriting before bed because they enjoy it and it's not going to cause a stressor. Having a good meal, but not too close to going to bed. So sometimes the evening meals can be very, very late, which can prevent going to sleep. You can bring that forward. Then people worry about their child being hungry through the night and they've woken up early because they're hungry. Generally, children don't wake up early because they're hungry, but that's parents feel that sometimes. You could then introduce a supper if you wanted to. So foods that contain tryptophan are really good. So tryptophan converts into melatonin. So foods that the one that people generally know about is bananas. Bananas contain a high level of tryptophan, but they also contain a high level of sugar. So they can go the other way with if your child's susceptible to sugar in terms of getting ready and feel sleepy. But other foods that contain high levels of tryptophan are bread, dairy, eggs, nuts, seeds, oats, hot milk. There's a science to the hot milk, like there's a science to the hot bath. It does contain tryptophan, which converts into melatonin. Stimulating activities, avoid them in the last hour before bedtime. Ideally switching off your TV, computer, phone, which we've already talked about the but of that as well. And the hot bath can be really, really good for relaxing. Also having a bedtime routine that goes alongside that. So people often say to me things like, should I use lavender? Does lavender work? Well, if lavender spray in your pillow becomes part of your bedtime routine and your body learns that when I smell this lavender, I then fall asleep soon after that, then lavender's fantastic. So it's just about setting a routine and our body getting used to what happens after that routine. One of the other things that often happen is that children can go into their bedroom and you put the light off and you settle them, and then they do things like, I need to go to the toilet. I need to go downstairs and get my teddy. All of those things. Some of them can be little ploy tactics. Some of them, they might need to go to the toilet, absolutely. But the minute that happens, and of course, as a parent, you think, I don't want my child wet in the bed. They're going to have to go to the toilet. And once they come out of their bedroom and they go through and they put a light on in the toilet and a light on in the hallway and they've walked about, they've switched off their melatonin. And their body has to reproduce that melatonin for them to get ready to go back to sleep. So as much as possible, I say to my parents, when the child is upstairs and in the bedroom, do the whole check of, now, have you got your teddy? Have you been to the toilet? Try and eliminate them getting back out of that room as much as you can, because they're going to switch off the melatonin by doing that. Some children reading, listening to relaxing music. Two of my children have a Yoto box, which is an audio player, which is fantastic. It has audio books on it, and the same way you can listen to them in Alexa. It's fantastic. Two of them love it. One of my children who does have autism absolutely hates the sound of the Alexa and hates the sound of an audio book on there, and that would be really stressful for him. So again, it's about knowing your child. Sticking closely to bedtimes, which we've talked about. Relaxation techniques for drifting off to bed. One of the things that you read about are counting sheep. The recent evidence has shown that counting sheep is not is counterproductive, in fact, to falling asleep. What they're now saying is if you can go on a walk, ideally a mental walk in your head around somewhere that you really, really enjoy. So there's a woods not far from here that I really like walking in. That would be my go-to place, and you imagine walking around it. All you're doing is lowering your heart rate and stopping your thinking brain overthinking stressful thoughts if you're going on a mental walk. So technique like that might be useful. I talk about mindfulness and mindfulness trained as well quite a lot. There's nice apps for that. Again, anything you're going to try doing it during the day with your child first, and then bringing it in at bedtime, so it's not a surprise or anything new at bedtime. So yeah, just to sum up, sleep, although there's all the sleep science and all the sleep science fits with everyone, it's highly personalised and complex. Every day, scientists are learning more and more, especially about sleeping and dreaming. We don't know enough. We don't know everything about sleep. One person I did my training with, one company, said that sleep was part of a triangle. So in terms of being healthy, you had healthy eating, you have exercise, and then you have sleep. And that the government's really good at pushing healthy eating and very good at pushing exercise, but where's the information on sleep? And I think that's accurate, but more accurate than that, Matthew Walker, the kind of sleep guru, would say actually sleep's here. And this is the absolute crux of everything. This is the crux of all of your healthy, everything. Being healthy, you have to have sleep at the foundation. And then healthy eating, exercise, all those other things build on top of that. And you can make really big differences to sleep by making small changes. Absolutely. Small changes to that bedtime routine, small changes to the way that the children settle can make a massive, massive difference, but it's all really, really individualised. So I am all done. Will I stop sharing now? I hope I do it right. Here we go.
Thank you. Thanks, Jamie, and thank you, Isla. I really enjoyed your presentation. Obviously, we talked a little bit about what was going to be in there, but hearing it in detail was really brilliant. So I'm going to talk, not for as long as Isla, just quite briefly really, about a project that we did with autistic young people. So we're moving to think now specifically about autistic young people and their experience of sleep, with our project that was called A Good Night's Sleep. Next slide, please, Jamie. So a little bit of background to the project. The project came about as a result of a piece of research that was carried out by Dr. Georgia Pavlopoulou at UCL. And she did something that hasn't really been done before. She asked autistic young people directly about their experiences of sleep. She asked 54 autistic young people, aged 12 to 17, to tell her about sleep, what it meant to them, the place where they go to sleep and its surroundings, what sort of activities and objects are related to their experience of sleep, also what happens during the day that relates to their sleep at night, and rather than sort of interviewing them in the traditional sense, what she asked them to do was to bring in objects, to draw pictures, to take photographs, to communicate about their experiences. And there were 4 key factors that came out of the research. One was around focused interests, one was around physical activity, one was around sensory autonomy during bedtime, and one was about having more control and choice in their daily lives. If we move on to the next slide. So this is just some of the original data, which I find really interesting to look at. So these are some of the photographs that young people took to communicate something about their experience of sleep. So you can see in the middle there, there's a picture of some cards, with someone saying, card games are fun, I know the rules and I know what can go wrong. And this was a young person who was talking about how it really helped to play a rule-based game before bedtime, something that was relatively predictable. The rules were very clear, an experience of spending time with a family member, but the focus on the game helped to distract this young person from other thoughts that they might have had, so help them to get ready for falling asleep. And there's lots of other pictures there that you can get ideas. Interestingly, just relating to what Isla was saying earlier about screens, one of those is engaging with PlayStation games that have calming and repetitive music and slow motion was something that helped towards sleep. So highlighting, I suppose, that yes, it's possibly more to do with what you're doing on the screen that makes a difference as to whether or not or how it will impact upon sleep. Yeah, preferred meal routines, completing homework, lots of different things that happen around the bed itself, which might be having certain certain sort of fabrics around, certain smells. It might be having a fan on, perhaps for the sound of the fan or the feeling of the fan. Real variety though in what these young people said helped them to sleep. Next slide, please. Ultimately, I suppose the takeaway was, and this is a quote directly from the paper, our results highlight that sleep should be treated individually and in relation to the environmental and personal factors that affect each autistic person. And I think this is really true, obviously, for autistic young people as we're thinking about here. But I think, as you probably picked up from Isla's presentation, this is really true for anybody. So the sort of science behind sleep is really, really valuable to understand. And I think from that understanding, we can then think about the different individual environmental and personal factors that we might need to weave into that understanding of how to support someone to get the best possible night's sleep. If we have the next slide, please. So just a little bit about our co-production project and what we did. We took this research paper to a group of young people at Roe Hill School. We summarised the paper and we shared the findings of the paper with them. They agreed that what was in that paper really made sense to them too, and they talked about their own experiences of sleep and what helps. Part of the team was the emotional wellbeing team. We also worked with a number of creative professionals and, of course, the researcher from UCL. Next slide, please. I think I've just talked through that process. So we discussed the findings of the research, and then we made 2 animations and a leaflet. And then further from that, there was also a lesson plan made for schools and some guided self-help materials for young people. And this is really what it's all about. It's about seeing this animation, which was inspired by the research and made by the young people who took part in the project in collaboration with the creative professionals that we worked with.
A good night's sleep. Learning about sleep from autistic young people. Sleep is important. It affects how we feel and when we behave when we're awake. It also affects how we learn at school. Our body and our brain need sleep. No one really knows what our brain does when we're sleeping. Some scientists think that the brain sorts out information, replaces chemicals and solves problems while we snooze. Lots of autistic people have difficulty sleeping. They might find it hard to fall asleep, they might wake up in the night, or they might sleep for less time than other people.
There is a lot of advice about how to get a good night's sleep, but we don't know whether it is helpful for autistic people. Usually, the first suggestions for many autistic young people who struggle to fall asleep or to stay asleep is to introduce general sleep rules. For some autistic people, this might feel unhelpful, and like one more pressure to comply with rules written by and for non-autistic people.
To find out more, researchers work with autistic people to understand what helps them sleep.
Personal sleep routines. Choosing things that feel, taste, smell and sound good helps some autistic teens to feel relaxed and stay safe before they went to bed. For example, special smells from clothes, toys, oils or body creams, eating certain foods or wearing comfortable clothes, putting things on the edge of their bed, blocking out noises, for example, turning on a fan. Relaxing before bed. Many autistic teenagers feel more relaxed when they have time to themselves and they choose what to do. Some say they find it easier to sleep on days where they have no extra clubs or activities. Here are some things they might do to relax. Listen to music, watch familiar videos, use a self-help series, exercise, take a bath or meditate. Spending time with family. Spending time with people in a way that's comforting and supportive help many autistic teenagers sleep. For example, relaxing in the same room, playing a rule-based game, talking about the day or planning the next day. Having familiar bedtime conversations can help.
Physical activity. I like going swimming because it tires me up.
I like kickboxing. Kickboxing includes combat training, weight training and cardio. This helps me zone out at the end of the day now I'm tired. Things that make me feel good. Many autistic teens say they sleep better when things make them feel good during the day. It helps to plan nice activities for the future, see what interesting lessons they have the next day, talk through schoolwork so they know how to do it. They have good relationships with their teacher and prepare for activities, or attend a club they have set up, or talk about good things that have happened. It is important to find out what works for you, even if it's different from sleep advice or what might work for someone else.
Thank you. So that's the leaflet, which contains a lot of the information that's in the video. This is some pictures from the launch. So we shared the animation and the leaflets at an event at the school that the young people attended, and parents and other people came along to that. Next slide. Thank you. This is some of the feedback from the launch, which is lovely. I really like the one that particularly that says, "Now I get it as a mum." And I think I've shared this animation and the leaflet and the research at a number of different forums now, and I think that's one of the things that's been a real takeaway for me, is how important it is for family members to hear this information as well. And I think that's what the young people who took part in the project also said, was that you know, they've found ways to help themselves sleep, but one of the challenges that they now encounter is other people telling them that it's not right. So perhaps they are listening to some music before bed, or they do have a light on, and they, you know, all the kind of traditional sleep hygiene tells them that these are things that they shouldn't be doing, and it leaves them feeling a bit confused or a bit frustrated because they found something that works for them. And I think that, you know, really echoes what Isla was saying as well, that it's not a problem unless it's a problem. Yeah, that's been something that I've taken away from sharing this with other people. Next slide, please. And so the guided self-help resources, so there's a sleep tracker there. I think on the next slide, yeah, so just really to facilitate conversations with young people. You know, what are your interests? What are the sorts of things that you'd like to do during the day that might help you sleep at night? What sorts of things can you do to support physical activity? What sorts of things can you do during the day that make you feel good? And what sorts of things can you choose? And those really echo the themes that came out of the research. I think something that was really important for me from the research was just how important daytime activities are in contributing towards sleep at night. So it's, you know, we can get quite focused on kind of a bedtime routine and what happens immediately before bedtime, but certainly the young people who took part in the research said that, you know, if they have a chance to choose to do some of the things that they really enjoy during the day, that can help them to sleep at night. But that can sometimes be difficult if they're in school all day, because they're perhaps not getting to choose very much the things that they would like to be doing. So the idea of these sheets is that by opening up those kinds of conversations, you can perhaps have conversations around, you know, how can we factor in some of those things that you like to do as part of your day. I think the other thing that stands out for me from the research was the number of times that having chance to kind of talk things through with somebody came up, not necessarily immediately before bedtime, but, you know, at some point having somebody to talk to, either about things that had happened in the day that they wanted to kind of process a bit and understand, or about kind of planning for the next day, taking away perhaps some of the uncertainty and some of the unknowns about the next day. Next slide. So one of those as well is about sensory experiences. So really recognizing that, you know, we're all sensitive to our, you know, sensory world, but particularly autistic young people. So what kind of sensory experiences might help with sleep? Then also thinking about how you could relax. So thinking more specifically about before bedtime, what can you do to relax? And how can you spend time with family and the people around you to support that. These are just, so that's just the lesson plan that's available for schools, and that's some of the feedback from young people who took part in a trial of that lesson plan with the teacher who put that together. yeah, and again, that point about, you know, I've been speaking to my mum about what we're learning about, and she really wants strategies as well. So the importance of it being something for all the family. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a link to this, but two of the young people who took part in the sleep project and helped create the animation were then really inspired by taking part, that they wanted to write a song about their experience of sleep, which they did, and then we were able to support them to create a music video as well, which I just think is a really nice example of how inspired these young people were by the whole project, and how motivated they were to communicate about their experiences of sleep. So yeah, that's just to introduce those resources to you, really, and for you to hear a little bit about that project, and specifically thinking about that angle of autistic young people. But I think really for me, what the research highlighted is the importance of that individualized, personalized approach. So really understanding the science behind sleep, and understanding some of those things that can work, but then also recognizing that it is going to need to be personalized for each individual.